Good to have you on campus. So welcome to the college. A couple of housekeeping. Restrooms are right out this door. And if you want Wi-Fi, we have Wi-Fi available. And tonight, our events team has designed a great password. It is debate, lowercase d, debate16. Okay? Is that fair? So on behalf of the college, I want to welcome you tonight. This is a special night for America. I don't know about you, but I spent the last week in 3 different states. And in 3 different states, this is all people wanted to talk about. This may be one of the most watched debates, I think, in American history. So thank you for joining us. We were thrilled that the Orlando Sentinel called us and asked us to do this. They are a great hometown newspaper. They are truly the fourth estate. And what I mean by that is they're the fourth estate as far as getting our community to be transparent. But they were just amazing partners, especially during the Pulse incident. They stepped up and supported this community, supported us as a college as we lost 7 students. So they are just a great hometown newspaper. I've known them for years because I grew up here. I even rode in what was then called the Sentinel Star Safari, that they sponsored a bike ride all the way across Florida, and I did that twice growing up. So just a great organization that supports our town, and we appreciate it. I want to thank a couple people from the college tonight. Stephen is in the, where is Stephen? Stephen Karzmachek. I always mispronounce his name because I just always call him Stephen. He handles our events and just does them flawlessly. Stephen, thank you for tonight. And then Stephanie Howell is our Director of Community Affairs. Stephanie, thank you for your leadership on this event. And so with that, this is a special conversation that's going to be led by Paul Owens, who is the opinions editor of the Orlando Sentinel. I didn't know until the other day, looking at Paul's resume, he and I actually have something in common. We're old congressional staffers, except he's a little bit taller and a little bit smarter because he worked in the Senate and I worked in the House. So what I would say is I worked in the people's house. But all of that said, give a warm Valencia welcome to Mr. Paul Owens, the opinions editor of the Orlando Sentinel.
Thank you, Jay. I think you were at least right about the taller part in the introduction, but I appreciate it anyway. Welcome all to another in our Florida Forward series of conversations about the future. And this is a very special edition tonight, our very first debate watch party to coincide with the first presidential debate of the 2016 general election between, let's see, who is it? I'm really pleased to be convening, as Jay mentioned, this event at the West Campus of Valencia College. Thanks to Valencia for graciously agreeing to be our host tonight and for fulfilling a most vital mission in a healthy democracy, civic education and engagement. Now, on to tonight's program, which we are live streaming on the Orlando Sentinel's website, orlandosentinel.com. That site and daily print editions of the Sentinel are where we'll continue to follow every twist and turn of this year's campaign under the leadership of our publisher and editor-in-chief, Avado Kahaifa, who has joined us tonight, along with our managing editor, John Cutter. And also a shout out to our other sponsors tonight, 90.7 WMFE, Central Florida's public radio station. And one of my personal favorites, Krispy Kreme Donuts, who have made their own tasty contribution to tonight's event. And also in the back, and hopefully this is as alluring as the donuts are for those of you who aren't registered to vote, is a place where you can register to vote. Now it's time to introduce someone who will be very familiar to those of you who are students or perhaps recent graduates. Professor Scott Crosby, who is the coordinator of Valencia's West Campus Political Science Program. There's Scott at the back of the room. As a teacher of U.S. government, state and local government, and international politics, he has ideal credentials to field questions from the audience for our panel as we talk about the issues raised by tonight's debate. You may have noticed when you came in that pens and pads were available where you could write questions. If you've written some questions, there is a bowl over here to my right, your left, where you can drop the questions, and then Scott is going to be reviewing the questions and asking a representative sample periodically. I'll be asking questions, and then Scott will ask some questions from the audience. And if this is like our other events, he will get many more than he has time to ask. So bear with him and us. He'll ask a representative sample of some of the best questions. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have 4 analysts to help us make sense of the debate and what's at stake. They will be answering my questions and yours. They're all members of a group of regular contributors to the Sentinel that we call the Central Florida 100. We publish a sample of their comments on the news each week, each Sunday on the Orlando Sentinel's op-ed page. We publish all of the comments online. I'm going to give the honor of introducing each of them to Michael Murphy, who is a member with me of the Orlando Sentinel editorial board and the editor of the Central Florida 100. Murph.
Thanks. It is really such an honor to introduce these 4 folks, because really when I think about who influences Orlando and who makes things happen and who key decision makers and influencers are, these 4 are tops. And they didn't sit boy, girl, like I thought they might. So I introduce first my good friend Maria Padilla, who has been here for 20 or more years. And if you want to know what goes on in the Latino community, you read her blog, Orlando Latino. And I have to read a quote. "I would hope that a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experience would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life." So said our future Supreme Court Justice Sandra Sotomayor. Maria has a daughter who is a judge, so she could likely end up on the Supreme Court someday. And she would have lots of wisdom to impart to justice that Maria has passed along. Tara Tedrow is next, and Tara is 29. Now, she has been writing for the Orlando Sentinel about 15 years. So even when she was in high school, she was so opinionated, and she would make people really angry. She gets under people's skin. But that's a good thing when you're an editorial page and you want to engage people in debate and to think about their community. Ernst Deloach is, he's a lawyer, but I think that his real day job might be politics. And he just does court on the side. I want you to think, he hangs out and parties with members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And if you know who John Lewis is, and you know some of those other stalwarts who marched with Martin Luther King back in the day and who are in Congress, this man knows them, and he just knows so well. He has 2 children, Jeremiah, who's 6. Elijah. Okay, and all right, now here's where we get to the interesting part. His daughter is 3, And she's Olivia, and she's going to run for president someday. She is going to be president, so the only thing that we have to figure out is whether my granddaughter will be her vice president or Olivia will be on the ticket with my grandchild at the top. And then there's Chris Carmody, and Chris Carmody is involved in anything positive, anything good that happens in Orlando. You could say he has his fingers in every pie, but it's a good thing because he is such a positive person. He is a hometown guy. He grew up here, and now he just, after Pulse, he was the one who threaded together initially the One Orlando campaign. And when you think of all the good that's going to happen because of people coming together, a lot of it, you could say, is because of Chris Carmody. So Ernst and Chris got to pay for college. Chris's son is 1 year old, and Ernst, so they've got a while to pay for college. Tara is through with her education, and Maria now is enjoying her daughter being a lawyer. So, but if you think about paying for your education, you start early, right? Anyway, thank you so much to these fine people and for contributing faithfully to the Orlando Sentinel and stimulating debate.
Thanks, Murph. Now, one last note before we get started. This is about the time normally in these events where I tell people to silence their cell phones. So go ahead and silence them, but don't turn them off, because we're encouraging you to use them to tweet during tonight's event, during our discussion, and then, of course, during the debate. And who will be able to resist that tonight? The hashtag is OSDebate16, and the 2 TV monitors on either side of the room are going to be our tweet walls, where we'll be projecting the tweets as they come in. So go ahead and tweet to your heart's content. And we do have another good reason for you to keep your phones handy and to stick around for our post-debate discussion. We will be taking an instant poll at the end of the debate, starting with the most obvious question, which of course is, who won? Yeah, you're with me. So let's go ahead and get started with the panel. I've got some questions, and I'm going to be interested in the views of each of the panelists on each one. And you all keep your own questions in mind. If you haven't already put them over in the bowl, you can do that during the discussion or any breaks. And I'll be checking in with Professor Crosby periodically so he can ask a representative sample. So I'm going to start with Maria with the first question for our panel, and that is, what should Hillary Clinton be trying to accomplish in tonight's debate?
I think she has to reassure people that A, she is healthy, because that has been in the news lately. That B, I think she has already convinced the country that she knows a lot of policy detail and she's very knowledgeable. But I think that she has to be able to relate to people in general and not get too much into the details that she loses the audience. I think that she has to show that she can be a commander-in-chief, that she can, in fact, lead the country in the direction that it needs to go in.
Okay. Tara, what would you say that Hillary needs to do?
I think in the 2008 election, likability was a question for Hillary Clinton, and it has been through the entirety of her career. So she's not going to try to appear necessarily more likable than she has throughout her entire campaign, because at this juncture, we're dealing with essentially 2 not very likable candidates to most of America. Her role tonight has to be to convince people that she does know a lot about foreign politics, which I think is undisputed, that Hillary is going to be the one who's better versed in both foreign and domestic politics, but also that she's going to be unrattled by Donald Trump. You know, his greatest advantage in debates is belittling people and not being rattled by anything that they say. So perception often becomes reality in debates, and if Donald is perceived as being the winner, she just has to meet what is unfortunately a very high bar for herself, because Donald's bar is about as low as it's going to get for somebody in a presidential debate. I mean, truly, we're not going to walk away and say, you know, wow, Donald was both a gentleman and a scholar tonight, you know, that neither of those adjectives are going to be used. So what he has to do is really just get really low under that bar and let people see the Donald Trump that they liked and that clearly have gotten him to this point. And Hillary just has to stay steadfast to her messaging and convince people that you might be more entertained by her opponent, but you'll be better led by her. So I would say that's her strategy.
Same question?
Yes.
I think what's been said obviously covers the point fairly well. I guess I'd add to Tara's just a little bit. I think Hillary's challenge is that she is facing two incredible double standards against her. One is the fact, and I think it should be put right out there, not a surprise to anyone, she is a woman running for president. And throughout her career, there's been, and not just in her career, for women, professional women in general, there's this ongoing dialogue, and all the psychology backs it up in the workplace, that there's an issue with strong women. And so Hillary has to both be strong, perceived as a commander-in-chief, perceived as unflappable in the face of what could be personal attacks, but at the same time, maybe not be too strong. I don't think she worries that much about that, but that is certainly an issue amongst some voters. I think the other double standard she has to sort of deal with, somewhat unfairly, is that she is the professional politician in the race. And so again, to Tara's issue, it's almost as if the media has given Donald Trump a bit of a pass. You know, he's not the polished, he's not the classic, he's not the traditional politician. So we let him say things, we let him do things, we let him insult people, because he's sort of like the little brother in the family, who's, because he's so young, gets away with stuff. But Hillary's the older sister. And as the older sister, it's because she knows better. We don't allow her to engage in that type of dialogue and back and forth. It's sort of the same thing happened to Marco Rubio in the primary process. You know, he tried to sort of get into the mud with Donald, and people sort of looked at him like, wait a minute, but you're a senator. And so she's got to be able, I think, to be able to engage him directly, show no fear, and yet at the same time remain above the fray. And that's going to be a difficult thing for her to do.
I would say she needs to stay out of his way for exactly what Ernest just said. In the Republican debates, Donald would belittle, he'd give nicknames, and to Ernest's point, when Marco bit and got in the mud with him, that was the end of his campaign. Maybe it was already over at that point anyways, and that's why he bit, but the polls have tightened. If 2 weeks ago, I think it would have been easy for Hillary to say, I'm not gonna engage with him, I'm gonna be the adult in the room, I'm gonna talk about policy issues. Have you seen her commercials? Which means you haven't seen her, except in the beginning when she says she approves this message. It's been all about Donald's an evil person, and I think that was working, but the basket of deplorables comment worked against her, and those polls have tightened a little bit. So I think now her team is going to be encouraging her to engage, but that's tricky with him because he'll say or do anything, and it seemingly works in these debates, and it's hard to engage in that kind of policy. And Lester Holt, I know that, you know, Hillary's camp's asking Lester to fact check on Donald Trump, but I know Donald's going to expect Lester to force her to engage with him even when he says some of these demeaning things. So I'd be curious, if I was her, I'd stay out of his way, because he'll say something that will be the headline and she can use that.
Okay, so now we're going to go with the corollary, and we'll start with you, Chris, and come back this way. And of course the question is, what does Donald Trump need to do? What should his goal or goals be in tonight's debate?
Did Tara say gentleman and a scholar? It wouldn't be a bad idea. I think he doesn't have the teleprompter, which has helped him, I think, shrink this lead that she has because he stayed on message. I think for him, he needs to go to do exactly what he did in those early debates, minus some of the insults. When you took out those insults, he was still a decent debater in the sense that he just kind of commanded the attention of the audience, the moderators. There's something, I mean, the guy's a reality TV star. He knows how to command the spotlight. If he goes back to that and just doesn't get too much in the weeds, because I'm not sure he can handle being in the weeds on questions, but just stays high road and stays, this is about making America great again, and stays on message, I think he actually will do okay, because it's been said by all of us, the bar is way high for Hillary. I mean, she's almost lost this debate before it started, because they're expecting her to be able to, run the mile sub 4 minutes and beat and lap him while doing it, whereas the bar is way low for him. So if he just comes off on message and doesn't have a blunder where he's fact-checked on something, in some ways he's going to be declared the winner.
Yeah, I agree. I think a couple things he has to do. Number one, he has to maintain a level and degree of temperament that I think is something that Hillary can't use against him. He's got to stay on message, certainly. He's got to avoid overly personal attacks. I frankly think he should stay away from any issues regarding infidelity, because although it's not something Hillary will come back at him probably from the stage, he's certainly vulnerable in that regard. I think it's well documented. He's in fact bragged about it. I think he has to watch also that he's never been in a one-on-one debate, and certainly not a 90-minute one-on-one debate. This is his 13th debate. This is Hillary's 33rd. She kind of knows what she's doing, and so I think he has to be careful not to be drawn into arguments, not to be essentially allow his anger or emotion to overcome him. But I agree with Chris. He only has to stay within range, right? They are nationally within 2 to 3% of each other. It's a statistical tie at this point. He doesn't have to win. He doesn't need a home run. He can hit singles and doubles all night long. And if the American public, or at least that 2 to 3% of persons who are undecided, walks away saying, maybe, that's a win for him. I think he needs to keep it in perspective.
And I agree, and to piggyback on what Ernest was saying, based on their experience alone with debate, the expectations are fundamentally different for the two of them. If I were to go have a 3-point shootout contest with Dwight Howard, you would expect he's going to make every shot. The minute I make one, the crowd's going to go wild, right? Because no one thinks that I can do that. But the expectation is a professional basketball player could. Hillary is a professional, seasoned debater. She has been since she was in high school and college. So this is not just during her years as a career politician. This is since she was a young girl. So her background is going to make her a very good technical and strategic debater. Unfortunately, these debates lend themselves to neither strategy nor technicalities, right? I mean, we do not want substance in these debates. The format doesn't lend itself to that. The time limitations don't either, and the audience certainly doesn't for the most part, maybe aside from everybody here. But for the most part, people don't want to hear and be bogged down with the burden of details in these debates, because it's more fun to walk away with zingers and headlines for the next day that we can retweet and talk about over and over and laugh at, or really say that one person stuck it to the other and had that gotcha moment that everybody's looking for. So I think that Donald just needs to do what he has done best in all of the debates, is he stays strong. He acts like he knows just enough, and maybe he'll, to me it's the Nancy Pelosi approach. Read it and you'll find out what it is, right? Donald, elect him and we're going to find out what it is, I guess. So if he even gives us an ounce of substance tonight, he is going to seem like a scholar. So that's really all he has to do, is just define his policies that up until now have largely been undefined.
I would agree with that up to a point. I think that Donald Trump has to remain standing. Because let's face it, I've watched every single one of the Republican debates, with maybe the exception of one. And although he commanded the center of the stage and he was the one that everyone was watching, he really didn't provide any answers. But now, as you were saying, he's now one-on-one with a woman who knows policy detail. That is her thing. And how is he going to get through 90 minutes of blah, blah, blah? I think that's going to be his issue. He has to remain standing. He has to fill in those 90 minutes with some amount of detail, because he's not going to be able, I think, to get away with what he did in the Republican debates, where you can kind of hang back because you had 16 other people on the stage with you, or 14 other people on the stage with you, and they were kind of fighting each other and they were debating each other, not really Donald Trump. So it's all on him now. He can't hide, he can't stand back, he has to have answers. And so I think, to the degree that 90 minutes is a very long time, I don't know, is he going to kind of wear out, going to be the Energizer Bunny, where he's just going to kind of keel over after an hour or 30 minutes? I don't really know, but I'm curious to see how he's going to fill that 90 minutes.
Of course, the 90 minutes is going to be in 6 15-minute blocks tonight. Professor Crosby, do you have a question or two that you want to interject now?
Yeah, thank you. We're getting some pretty strong questions, and I'm picking out a few themes that are popping up here. So I'm going to start with, what responsibility, if any, does a debate moderator have for fact-checking candidates?
Zero. The answer is zero. The Commission on Presidential Debates was established in the late 80s for a reason, and it was to get all of that out of the presidential debate series, right? Took it away from the Women League of Voters for a reason, and once that became a bipartisan effort, it should not have a moderator fact check. Imagine the format. You say something as an answer, and the moderator says, well, hold on a second, I just looked on the internet, and that's not true. All right, next question, Hillary. That doesn't work, right? Because then that person's going to automatically want to start arguing with you as the moderator, and this is not about letting a moderator shine. The point is to educate the American public. Is that going to happen tonight? No, probably not. We're not going to get a very good substantive education on any domestic or foreign policy details. I think we can all expect that. But we should not have any moderators playing a role of trying to fact check. That is the job of the other person in the debate. A true debate includes a rebuttal, and you can only have a good rebuttal if you can argue against what somebody else said. That should be part of everybody's rebuttal. You are failing at your job as one of the potentially elected officials to be our next president if you yourself cannot keep somebody else in check.
No, I was just going to say, again, I agree with you up to a point. I don't think it's going to be...
for us, though, right?
It's going to be the tenor of the whole night, probably. I think that the moderators really cannot get into fact-checking every bit of detail or every utterance from either candidate, but I do think that there is some sort of responsibility on the part of the moderator to at least correct an egregious lie. I'm not even going to be, euphemistic about it. If it's an egregious lie that cannot be allowed to stand, somebody needs to step up, I think, because I think that would be the moderator's role.
Yeah, can you tell Tara is a former debater? My better half, Lauren, she would probably agree with Tara. She's a debater in college as well. But from my perspective, I think of, and it hurt my team, because I am a Republican, voted for Romney. He was fact-checked by Candy Crawley in the second debate 4 years ago, and she was right. And I rewatched it, I was curious. Here's Mitt talking about the embassy bombing, and President Obama at least a couple times say, that's not true. I never said that. That's not true. And there's this back and forth. And so at some point, when one says no, to your point, Tara, it kind of counters and says that's not true, what else do you rebut? Do you start citing news sources? I guess so. But Candy just jumped in and says, simply, that's not true. And Mitt got burnt. It probably cost him the rest of those debates, because the fallout the next day was Mitt was wrong, Candy called him on it, and that was that. So I think there's a role for it, but to Tara's point, you really want these two to engage, and that's what I think all of America's that's going to tune in's looking for. You want to see this engaging, but it's tough sometimes, because if past this prologue with both of these debaters, both Hillary and Donald, they're going to try to avoid engaging each other and try to have a little bit of talking with America on the camera, and hopefully Lester can force them to, the moderator trying to engage, and maybe if that means fact-checking once or twice to kind of push the envelope, I'm okay with it.
Just real quickly, I agree with everything everyone said up to now. First, shout out to Lester Holt, first African-American moderator of a national general election debate since 1992. What I find interesting about the question is, within that question, there's a fact check, right? So Donald Trump came out, as many know, within the last few weeks and basically said, look, I think there's going to be bias already in this debate because Lester Holt's a longtime Democrat. Shockingly, perhaps to Donald Trump, Lester Holt's a longtime Republican. In fact, he's been a Republican longer than Donald Trump has. So if Lester Holt's going to it's true. If he's a Republican at all now, I guess you could argue. But so the first fact check, I hope Lester Holt actually throws down the fact that he's not a Democrat. But seriously getting into what the role of the moderator should be, at least in this debate. A lot of these debates are sort of like prize fights in this way, right? We're not advocating fisticuffs literally, but in this regard. The first answer to the first question is going to be prepared. It's going to be memorized. It is going to have a little zinger in there for some entertainment. It's going to come across like a speech. It's the second question, right? It's the question that the moderator brings back to the candidate if they didn't properly answer the first. It's the rebuttal that the candidate will have a chance to offer because of what the other candidate may have said. So in other words, it's a counterpunch debate. And Trump has said very clearly, and I think the record shows, that he's really good at reacting. He's a counterpuncher. So I think the moderator's job has to be, A, to know when to allow and even instigate a counterpunch. In other words, you didn't answer that first question. Let me give it back to you the way I actually asked it. But also to referee a bit to make sure that the counterpunches don't get out of hand and all of a sudden we fall into some sort of disarray. So I think that's going to be Lester Holt's difficult job tonight.
Okay, Scott, how about another question?
All right. There seems to be a few questions here regarding third-party candidates, so I'm going to throw one out there. What is your opinion on voters who, unsatisfied with either candidate, are planning on voting for one of the third-party candidates who are not invited? And that's to whoever would like to take it.
I'll say I'm disappointed Gary Johnson's not in the debate. I'm okay with them not including him under the rules that are there, but I think he would have added a lot of spice to this debate. And he's a good leader, even if you don't agree with everything he said. But that goes to a fundamental problem. The polls tend to control what happens here. 3 weeks ago, the polling was, are you voting for Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton? They didn't say, or Gary Johnson or whatever, but after enough people were saying, no, we're voting for Gary or we're voting for Stein, then they started including him in the polls. I would not be shocked by the last debate if he is included, because if tonight is a train wreck, and some people think it could be, then a lot of people are going to be looking for that third option. Quick internet search and you'll find two. But if it goes well tonight, maybe not. But if it doesn't go as well as either candidate's hoping for, they're going to be looking, and now he's going to jump into those polls. But I wish they'd be included, but I understand why they're not. You have to poll at a certain level, otherwise let everyone on the stage.
You know, everyone should vote their conscience, as Ted Cruz once famously said that he's gone against now, not too long ago. And so, I would never argue that someone shouldn't vote for one of the third-party candidates, either Ms. Stein or certainly Mr. Johnson. Look, I don't know that early in the morning on television I would have remembered where Aleppo was either, so I don't hold that against him. I think it's fine for you to vote whoever you want to, but I think you have to realize the context and the outcome. Essentially, a vote for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein is a vote against Hillary Clinton. And as long as we're clear on what the result will be, that's fine. Feel free to vote for whoever you want to. The bottom line is neither one of them are going to win. And in essence, you are enabling the Republican candidate to gain the necessary electoral votes to win. That's just the truth.
And I agree with Ernest. The problem is that mindset is what has kept us in a two-party system, right? No third party will ever gain traction unless people think it's worth their time and effort to fundraise for them, go door to door for them, and put them in the polls, and then see them in the debates. I'm fine with the 15% requirement to be able to get inside the debates. I think that the commission did a good job setting that a while back, because we don't want to waste our time with such little time that we actually have to hear two candidates go head to head. I don't really, frankly, want to waste it listening to somebody who statistically has no chance of winning. So I would rather hear those two people and what their policy differences are. So while it is a disappointment that we don't get to hear the ideas that could be espoused by third-party candidates, at the same time, it's just a practical necessity in the way that we formatted these debates.
I, for one, am not disappointed that there are no third-party candidates in this debate. First of all, the presidential election is over a year old. And both of these candidates, each of these candidates have been in the arena for over a year. This has been a very long, tough haul. So we have finally arrived at the point where the two who are left standing can face each other. And third-party candidates tend to kind of come into the picture somewhere in the middle or even later, when a lot of campaigning has already occurred. So I am not missing the third-party candidates. I respect people's choice to vote for a third-party candidate if that's what they want. But really, it's about these two people who have been just slugging it out for, 16, 15 months, it's about time. It's time.
Okay, I have a question for the panel now, and this is a two-part question. Tonight's debate is expected to be viewed by tens of millions of Americans. It's the Super Bowl minus the clever, memorable commercials. So the question is, do you think the attention that America puts on presidential debates is appropriate? And do you think that they are an accurate indicator of how well qualified a candidate is to be president, to be commander-in-chief?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. I read an interesting article this week, and it said presidential debates are not on the level. And that was stolen from President Obama's team when he notoriously hated the debates. He didn't like them at all. He did well, except for the first one against Mitt. But the whole point is it's all about zingers. It's about faux pas. And I think Tara said it best, it's very little on substance. What do we remember from the 2000 debates? Al Gore just shaking his head and sighing into the microphone. John McCain, I rewatched it because I was preparing for this, doing the old grandpa laugh every time he didn't like something. Then Senator Obama, and it was like you could not see it or hear it. Even going back to George H.W. Bush, checking his watch, clearly had somewhere else to be when he was debating then Governor Clinton. And those are the takeaways, not, wow, someone really hit the nail on the head, And in fact, even when you get the policy right, like in that one debate, Mitt brought up Russia as a major problem for America, and President Obama just dismissed him, said you can take your foreign policy back to the 80s. And who was right? Mitt. So even when you get it on the head with substance, people forget it. The one-liner that President Obama put out is what people remembered when he dismissed them and made a joke about the 80s. So are they important? Sure, because perhaps there'll be some substance, but personally, I don't think it merits the attention it gets. That's just my view.
I agree. I do believe that on a certain level, though, we're in an age where, because of Twitter and Facebook and social media, and the 24-hour media cycle, that you find candidates talking about each other when they're not in the same room often, right? They're reacting to what each other did. Trump says the other day, Hillary's copying me. She's got her plane behind her at a campaign stop. Hillary has been just as reactive in social media to what Trump has done or has said, and has gotten her message out. I think there is something to having the two candidates in the same room on the same stage, at least philosophically subjected to the same types of questions and the same crucible, I think, of questioning, and how they react as against each other, how they relate to each other, how they're able to differentiate themselves from each other while together. I think that is important. I'm hoping this doesn't happen, but I remember talking about old debates. I remember back in 2000, Al Gore leaving his podium and walking into the personal space of George Bush, which I thought was fairly odd and awkward. But what I took from that, if you remember, Bush was completely unfazed. And I say that quite frankly disappointedly, since he won that election, allegedly. He's appointed by the Supreme Court, perhaps. But that's a whole nother issue. But there was something about Gore's willingness to engage him directly. He sort of had the reputation of being somewhat soft in certain ways, and there was something about, frankly, George Bush's ability to maintain his composure when he did it. Again, I'm hoping that does not happen tonight, but I think we can draw something from the mannerisms and interaction physically in the same room when they're subjected to a debate.
Debate like this is great for TV, right? It's great for the news outlets. They've been running 24 cycles with countdown clocks like we're about to hit the new millennium, right? I mean, everybody's really excited for this. This is great for journalists. This is great for the news. But what we should not take for granted is that debate is the essence of democracy. There are more people in this world who have no right to question the laws under which they live than there are people who do. So debates like this are truly an opportunity for people to remember why we are so very blessed to live in a country that, number one, you can vote Number two, you have choices in that election, whether we question outcomes or not, right? I mean, you do have a right to vote. And number three, you can question those people who are going to put laws that you have to live by. So I think debate is incredibly important for critical thinking, for you to make an informed decision, but it really is so important for democracy that we have these types of debates and that we don't ever stop having them on any level of government.
I think debates are important. I love watching them personally. I think we do learn a lot about them. Yes, they are partially scripted, but there are so many moments in a debate that are not scripted that it's important for us as just individuals to be able to size up, the two or more debaters on stage. I do think that it's not just the United States that's watching, the entire world is watching. Who is going to may potentially be the leader of the free world. So that's very, very important. And as for whether somebody's going to get out from behind the lectern or whatever, there was a debate with Hillary where she was running for Senate in which she was debating her male opponent, and he came out from behind the lectern, and I think that he probably lost the election right there because he was seen as threatening a woman, being very aggressive with a woman. And so there are lots of unscripted moments like that that really tell you something about that person. So I do think they're very important.
Let's go back to Professor Crosby and see if there's a question from the audience.
Yes, seeing some questions regarding voter turnout. So I'm going to pose just one of them to you. Some voters state they are, quote, voting for a lesser of two evils, unquote. Do you think this will affect the voter turnout in this election? And that can be handled by
If I may? Oh, yes.
whoever would like to take that one.
I think that people feel very passionate about this election. So I'm not really believing all of the polls when they say that people wish they had better choices. Sure, we always wish we had better choices in almost every election, quite frankly. But I do think that people do feel very passionately about the presidential race almost every time, each and every time. And there are just a lot of people who are not going to say one way or the other. They don't want to engage in a debate defending their choices in terms of who they back or who they plan to vote for. So I think the turnout is going to be high. I really do.
I think it depends on how you define it. I think the Obama elections are both outliers. He has engaged the young vote in ways no one's done it since JFK. And the stats, I mean, I love sports, advanced sabermetrics, all that stuff. I mean, he's the Steph Curry of elections. I mean, his numbers are so out of the stratosphere, it's hard to kind of compare them. So I think we'll have lower voter turnout this election than we have in the past two cycles. But I do think you'll have newer people coming to the polls. And I think that's something you can credit Donald Trump with. If you look at the presidential preference primary earlier this year, much higher turnout than what we usually see on the Republican side, and I think you can completely tie that to Donald Trump. And we're all involved locally in politics. I've told all the folks running both Republican and Democrat, be careful, because I think those folks will continue to vote in this cycle. You saw an uptick in the primary election, and you'll probably see it again in the general. But will we have overall higher turnout? I don't think so. You look at the stats, the youth vote is not nearly as engaged with Hillary as they were with President Obama. She's had difficulty making inroads in the African American community like President Obama did. So now, will a lot of those demographics still vote? Probably, but I don't think in the same numbers they did the last two cycles.
I think Chris is right. I'm a little concerned, actually, about turnout, certainly for the Democratic candidate. I think Republicans are going to turn out, frankly, because they, in general, don't want to see a third Obama administration. Is one of the calling cards you hear often.
Good, you're sticking to the talking points.
Well, you know, I pay attention to them so I can tear them up. Yeah, so that's one of the things that's been said. So I think there is a concern whether they're single issue voters who maybe are not in love with Trump but are concerned about Second Amendment issues, are concerned about the Supreme Court. They're going to turn out. They're going to turn out for down ballot elections as well, right? There's a battle to keep the Senate amongst the Republicans. There are some state gubernatorial elections that are up for grabs, including North Carolina, which is a huge swing state for the presidential election as well. Here's my concern with young folks, and I hope I'm wrong, and please tell me I'm wrong, because I'd love to be wrong in this regard. There are still a lot of Bernie supporters out there who, when they said Bernie or bust, they meant it. They're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I continue to hear people, and I swear I hope that there are fewer than the media makes it out to be, who continue to say things like, Hillary hasn't earned my vote yet. And I don't know what she needs to do other than running against Donald Trump to earn your vote if you were a Bernie supporter. I really don't. But I continue to hear that. You continue to hear that Hillary going, 270 some odd days without a press conference, issues regarding her health, that there's a cool or a lull in her campaign, and I think she needs to show some excitement tonight to sort of bring back that energy. So that's a concern for me amongst young people and disaffected voters. First-time voters think more than likely are going to be on the Republican side. Disaffected voters are more than likely going to be on the Republican side. And then the last two things that I think are going to push potentially folks who are kind of lukewarm in this election, God forbid there's another terrorist attack or anything that looks like a terrorist attack or anything that Donald Trump will call a terrorist attack. God forbid that's going to push turnout on his side. God forbid there's another shooting of an unarmed black male in this country by law enforcement. No matter what the circumstances may or may not be, no matter how the city government might respond in terms of bringing charges quickly or releasing videos quickly, because potentially that pushes, I think, Hillary. Again, no one's looking for disaster to help them in the election, and yet I think from a turnout standpoint, those are two issues that could absolutely push folks in either direction for either candidate.
Something to keep in mind, too, is what is on the state ballot that people are also going out for. You're going to get a lot of people going out to vote on Amendment 2 in Florida. So that's going to be an issue that's going to drive people to go to the polls, even if they are not enthusiastic about one of these two candidates. So those types of issues might get a lot of people out in this election. And you're right, the Obama elections were outliers. Never have I ever heard people talk about a presidential candidate like it was, some frat guy running for office. I mean, Obama was cool, right? People talking about a presidential candidate, about how he had swagger and he was cool and he played basketball and he did drugs, in college and like all this stuff. I mean, this was like a buddy on the ballot, And so people came out and they'd be like, what do you vote for Obama for? Obama's awesome. It's like, oh, okay, anything else, And so that did get a lot of youth out there. Now listen, I want people to vote because I also think that is obviously the essence of democracy as well, is voting and debate. A lot of people have given up their lives for us to have the right to vote, and I think that should be respected by going to the ballot and taking advantage of that fundamental right. But I just think this election is so different because nobody is enthusiastic really about either candidate like they were in the last election. Some people are very enthusiastic about Trump because he does give you the kind of like ha-ha moments that people look for that you're not going to get from Hillary Clinton. So I don't know, voter turnout's going to be interesting in this election. There's going to be a lot of factors at play, and it's just disappointing to think that there are a lot of registered voters who aren't going to take advantage of that right.
I think comedians are really excited for a Trump presidency.
Oh,
I think you're right. There's a lot of material there, potentially. It's just the rest of us that are scared out of our wits.
Scott, any more questions from the back?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, one more for you, but this one's in two parts because I see a theme in two different directions on this one. It's about election tone, or the tone of the election, all right? And to take two questions and kind of put them together for you here. First part, is this election any more negative than past elections in your opinion? And then the second part of the question would be, do you believe that the tone of elections in general are getting more negative over time? So take it 1, 2.
If I can start. I think certainly this has been one of the most, if not the most unpredictable presidential election I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. I've never seen the seesaw that has occurred throughout the entire campaign on both sides, quite frankly. Because remember that Bernie Sanders came quite close in terms of the number of delegates and so forth. So it's been really, really crazy. I think it's been very, very negative because of the reality show nature of how the campaign has unfolded. And I'm a little bit kind of sick to my stomach and apprehensive tonight about what the debate is going to look like, thinking that it's going to be a little bit like Roman Colosseum type of thing, and whether or not, the lions are going to come out and start, sort of chewing each other to death or something. I'm very apprehensive about the whole thing. So the answer is yes, I think it's getting worse.
And I agree. I think this is the first election, probably any of us can think of, where the just ethical nature of both candidates is in question. I mean, how morally corrupt can they be when compared to each other? And everybody can seem to say that even if they're supporting one of the two candidates. I think that the use of technology has also shifted and will forever have shifted the way that elections are run. It was really the first Obama administration that utilized social media to his advantage. And so now we live in a world where we have a chokehold on information gathering constrained by character counts. And that's very disappointing for anybody who likes details or policy information. But in these elections, all we do is sling mud because that's the easiest thing to do in less than 100 words. It's very difficult to get into a debate or a deep analysis about somebody's policies, but what you can really talk about is their character. So now we have used character count limitations to just focus on the character of these two candidates. And, you know, truly, we have a very watered down political system in terms of discourse now. And that's disappointing because we don't talk about the issues, so we just kind of talk about the people the same way that you find people just doing on Facebook and other forms of social media. So it's too bad that politics has been sucked into that, you know, that hemisphere. I wish it hadn't, but that's just the nature of technology and the way that we're utilizing it, especially during campaigns to get traction in voters.
I think, you know, I think that's absolutely true. I think we need to remember, though, with some context, that politics is a dirty game. And it's been dirty for a very long time. I think what we've seen in this election is the volume of mud that's been slung, but not necessarily the type of mud. I mean, if you think back, remember, it wasn't that long ago, I guess it was back in 2000, when George W. Bush, who had just suffered a humiliating defeat up in, it was either New Hampshire or Iowa, I don't recall which, by John McCain, that went to South Carolina and started a rumor that John McCain had a black baby. That was not 20 years ago, right? That was a decade and a half ago. When Joe Biden, you know, kind of creepy Uncle Joe, who's now one of our favorite old guys around, I guess, when Joe Biden said about President Obama in 2008 that he was clean and articulate, not exactly a dirty thing, but something certainly that went to the nature of his heritage and his race. You know, let's talk the birther controversy that, thank God, Donald Trump settled for us all after starting it in the first place. We appreciate that, Donald. But really, it's the volume, right? I think I read an article on Politico the other night that there are essentially, and you could argue with the number, 37 different comments that Donald Trump has made throughout this election cycle, any one of which should have ended his campaign. But it didn't. It didn't. Even he said, you know, he could stand in the middle of Park Avenue or Madison Avenue and shoot someone and he wouldn't lose a vote. I mean, I think it's the volume, it's the nature, it's society, it's you name it, you know, it's everything, all of the above. But remember, this has never really been a clean game from the get-go. It just I mean, you know, I love Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's a movie. It's a movie. So we've seen the steady, I think, decline, unfortunately, of the discourse in politics.
Yeah, it seems every 4 years that the articles come out, some scholarly source talks about how dirty politics has been in play pretty much since the first election in American politics. Has it changed some? Possibly, but I think more than anything, we just have more transparency. You know, were there more kidnappings last year than there were 20 years ago? Probably not, but we know about every single one that happens this year with 24-hour news cycles and Twitter and what have you. I think the shift this year is usually the candidates would let, for lack of better terms, their minions do that. You know, like Richard Nixon's dirty tricks. He had folks doing that for him, but he was presidential still. You know, he wasn't breaking into Watergate. It was his friends were, and he was just trying to cover it up, I guess. But but with Donald Trump now, you have a candidate who is not quote unquote acting presidential. He's just doing the dirty work for himself. He's not asking someone else to do it. He's going directly at candidates, and that has been a shift. And I think some folks, a lot of candidates weren't ready for it, but it's clearly worked for him. And I think some of it, the truth is that we expect our candidates to engage in that to some degree, because as Ernest said, since as long as America's been around, politics has always been a rough and tumble sport. And even so, look at Ted Cruz. His campaign was caught sending out some of those mailers that were like the voter mailers that makes you think you can't vote anymore, like, in other words, trying to keep them from going to the polls. And they held him accountable because with all the transparency now, people, sources, Twitter, everything, you can pretty much figure out which campaign's responsible for what. And so I think Donald just he's hacked the system to some degree and owned it and said, I'll just be the bad guy. And in some ways it's worked. Will it work, 50 days from now? We'll find out. But I think that's been the real shift, is that someone's actually just owned it. He went heel like Hulk Hogan did in his later days. They like the wrestling reference? Yes. He went heel and everyone seems to be okay with it.
Okay, your time is running short. I don't want to miss the beginning of the debate, so I'm going to ask a quick question of each of the panel members. We're going to go back to the football metaphor again. So your final prediction, who wins tonight's debate? Just briefly, each one.
I think it may be a draw.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with that. I don't know. I guess it depends. What are your expectations for the debate? I think all of us are going to have very different criteria for what constitutes a win. I'm going to think neither of them win because it's not going to be a real debate probably. I think Donald will win in a lot of people's minds if he just does what he does best, which is be bombastic and be outspoken and not seem like too much of a jerk next to Hillary Clinton. So I think it'll probably be a draw. I will likely be disappointed regardless, so we'll tune back in 90 minutes.
I'm going to say it's going to be Hillary. I think she's going to come out strong. I think she's got a lot to prove, especially of late regarding her health, her stamina, her endurance. I think she's going to be the smartest person in the room. I think she's going to maintain her composure. I think Trump is looking at this as a 3-debate series. And I think he's going to put a toe in the water. I think he's going to try some things out. He's going to see how they work. And I think he'll go back to the lab and he'll come back strong for the second debate. But I think Hillary wins the first.
You said football, so I'll say I think the Saints are going to beat the Falcons tonight as that game started. But I think Hillary wins, but since we're going to use football, I don't think she covers the spread. I think Donald will do just enough to make himself viable, and to Ernest's points, he's got a couple more debates, so she'll win. The only way she doesn't win if she actually does pass out on stage. She does know more on the substance. Nothing against Donald, it's worked so far, but one-on-one, he's going to have to be forced to get into the weeds some, and that's just not a strong suit. But I think he'll come up with just a few nuggets that's what some of us might be talking about tomorrow.
Okay. Well, we will wrap it up for now. We'll reconvene at 10:30 after the debate. That's when we'll also be doing a poll where we all ask you who you thought won the debate and a few other questions. So we'll all watch together and then reconvene at 10:30.